Well, this is my podcast, but I have to start by thanking you for having me here.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure. One of the greatest accomplishments of my life.
Is having me here?
Oh, I thought you meant having me.
This, as you can tell, is my mom. Barbara Landau is a professor at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. She's an elected member of the National Academy of Sciences, a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Cognitive Science Society, and several other organizations. She was named a Guggenheim Fellow in 2009. My brother and I often joke that she's won all the prizes possible, that the only thing left is a Nobel, to which she scoffs. Growing up the son of an acclaimed scientist meant being the control in plenty of experiments. It also meant learning to think about things differently and deeply. And as I've gotten older, conversations with my mom have enhanced. In this episode, we talk about the onset of artificial intelligence and political polarization and social media and the mental health crisis, but also the change that my mom navigated in her life, in losing her father at an early age, and finding a mentor and a place in science, and also finding happiness and love. This episode is brought to you by Breezeway, a property care and operations platform, and B&B Finder, the property listing marketplace built for professional property managers. B&B without the fees.
So I was working in the store for a while I was sort of doing nothing. And then I decided I had to go back to graduate school because I was good at school, but also I could sort of boost my understanding in psychology and who knows what. So I got a series of master's degrees, which was sort of ridiculous in retrospect, except that it was part of not knowing what I wanted to do. So I did that. And at some point in one of the master's degrees, which was at Rutgers University in New Jersey, at some point, the person that I was working with, the faculty member I was working with, left the university to go do a postdoc with somebody at Penn named Lila Gleitman. And I went one day to meet this person, Adele, who I was working with. And I met Lila Gleitman because she was the postdoc supervisor, the supervisor of the faculty member I was working with. And when I met Lila, I was really blown away. And I thought to myself, that's what I want to be.
What was it about? What were you blown away by? Like, what specifically?
Well, first of all, I had an interest in language learning. What wasn't called cognitive science in those days, it became cognitive science pretty quickly. It was, cognitive science only really started formally maybe in 1980s or so, early 1980s. So it was sort of a version of psychology. It was about language learning and cognitive development. I was fascinated with children, always fascinated with children's minds, because I felt like they have this phenomenal ability to learn and phenomenal knowledge that prompts their learning. And I just thought that was the most fascinating thing in the world. And language acquisition was something that I was particularly interested. So when I met Lila, first of all, she was the most brilliant person I had ever talked to in, the academic world. And she was incredibly warm and supportive. And she said to me, well, for your next step, why don't you come to Penn? And I thought, whoa, that would be amazing.
What was it about her personality, on top of all of the credentials and the hospitality?
I mean, I wouldn't say hospitality. I would just say personal warmth. And she was very funny. I mean, we just clicked right away. And like I said, I had never met anybody like that really in my academic ventures. And I think in retrospect, Matthew, I think I was always an academic. I mean, I was always good at school. My father was sort of an academic. My parents were highly educated. And I just didn't really see that in myself until I think I met her. And then I recognized something, I think also. And also, just gave me huge direction, because if I did go to work with her, then I felt really confident that I would learn a huge amount. And I didn't have high aspirations for myself, to be honest with you. I thought, yeah, I think, getting a PhD would be a good thing. And I think I like language acquisition, and I love the idea of working with Lila. And that seemed right. It just felt right.
Do you think Lila's role in your life supplied something that was lost when your father died?
That is a very good point, Matthew. And I did skip that part in the timeline. So that's a very important part. So I met Lila when I was I think I was maybe 26 or 27. So I had been out of undergraduate for about 5 years. After I graduated from Penn, which was 2021, and I was sort of poking around and trying to figure out what to do, I actually went to work, in addition to working at Dad's store, which definitely didn't work because both of us were always right. So that had a very brief life. But I then went to work for a market research company in Princeton. And I actually found out very quickly that I was actually very good at it. And I worked with some very smart people, one of whom was my immediate supervisor. And he was a big marketing guy in New York. And he said, you're great at this. And I really felt like I was, but it didn't have the satisfaction of sort of the intellectual questions that kept niggling at me. During that time, my father died very suddenly. He, as you know, he had been quite ill with multiple sclerosis. He was diagnosed when he was a graduate student at Penn. He was a graduate student and got his PhD in physics from Penn. And MS is a slow and progressive disease, but some are worse cases than others. It's treated very differently now than it was then. So he was about 26 or 27 when he was first diagnosed with MS. I mean, I don't know whether I was even born. Maybe I was an infant. And he was in not bad shape until he was about 40. And he died when he was 50 of a massive heart attack. But between 40 and 50, it was very, very painful to watch him deteriorate.
How old were you?
So I was 23 when he died, which would make me be 13 when he sort of started really to decline. And so that was a painful time of life, and I think contributed to my just not having a clue about what I wanted to do. There was no emotional energy that I had to think about other things. So anyway, he died when I was 23, and when I met Lila, when I started back to graduate school and I started picking up these academic interests, it was really energizing for me. And when I met Lila, it was even more so. So Lila and her husband Henry Lightman were like my intellectual parents. And I do think that getting into that community, being in that community with those mentors, was a very powerful, I don't want to say replacement, but it was a very powerful context for me to realize my own interests and passions and talents, but also in a way to replace something that I had lost.
Were there times when you were realizing that you're really good at this, or you were realizing that you're going down the path of science, that you realized, this is connected to my dad?
Yeah, very, very many times. I mean, I remember thinking in graduate school that my passion, but also my focused energy, just the amount of energy that I could devote to this and the drive, was really deeply connected to something like filling a gap in my soul. So yeah, I did think about that a lot. And I think ultimately it's sort of ironic because I never thought of myself as a scientist. I have to say also, seeing Lila, the scientist, and who she was, her multidimensional self, that made me realize I guess I could be one of those too. I had no other real role models for that kind of intellectual force and level. And she really supplied that. So, I mean, it's really true that, finding the right mentor is really critical for a lot of people. I think it's especially critical for people who find themselves underrepresented in the top tier of whatever they're in.
The creative growth that I'm going through requires some discipline in recognizing there was a world that I was in that I knew fairly well, that I have made achievements in. It's like a purview, a vision, a kind of space that I'm familiar with. Part of my sort of transformation, I would say, is breaking free of that in a lot of ways, and understanding that there's a whole new world that I haven't been paying attention to. It's a deeper world. It's a more elevated world. It's a wider world of all these new things. And it's very hard when you're in the old to envision something that you've never encountered before. And I think that's what the role of a great mentor or role model can do, is like, oh, this person, I want to be them, right?
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I'll say that beyond the single mentor, what's really important is having a community, a whole community. I mean, when I went to Penn as a graduate student, and from there on, I had not only Lila and Henry, but I had everybody they knew and everybody they were connected with. And it was an extensive, and remains an extensive community that just never goes away. And that's enormously important for your own identity, um, and also for your own movement forward, productivity, creativity, listening to people, hearing what other people are doing, getting ideas from talking with like minds is hugely important. So I guess I want to start with before I was in graduate school, because this is a great story that should be told. It'll be brief. It was when I was working in market research, and just about everybody in the company was male. And I liked them all. I worked well with them. There were a couple of other women. But I went one time, we had a new account at, I think it was actually Mercedes in New Jersey. We were going to pitch a marketing campaign to them. And I was running the campaign, sort of the development of the research tools from inside our company. And I went with the president of the company. The two of us drove up to the Mercedes-Benz location, their headquarters in New Jersey. And we walked in and they greeted us. And I think it was a woman, I'm pretty sure it was a woman who greeted us and took our coats and said to the president, would your secretary like a desk to work at?
Ouch.
But that was very common, unbelievably common.
What'd
So
you say?
what did I say? I don't remember, Matthew. I just don't remember. I just thought it was so absurd. And I don't remember what he said, but he might have done the right thing, which is to say, she's not my secretary. She's actually heading up this project. I just want to tell you that is so common. And even today, the same kinds of ridiculous errors can be made. I mean, any senior woman can tell you large numbers of stories that are similar to this. And by the way, one of the stories that Lila told in her lifetime of storytelling was that when she graduated from college, she was a literature humanities writing major, phenomenal writer. And there was a guy who graduated at the same time as a good friend, and they both went to New York to get jobs in editing. And they went to a publisher and they both got jobs. He got the job of editor. She got the job of Gal Friday. which was the name for somebody who went and got coffee for people and, straightened the papers and et cetera. So just to tell you, that was probably in the 50s, and my experience with Mercedes-Benz was in the 70s.
So is the growth there, the difficult growth, the painful growth, the uncertain growth in which you don't know what's on the other side, is that learning how to handle those types of situations in new ways?
When you're young, early in your career, it is about learning how to handle situations like that, and having a mentor who understands totally is invaluable. And so I used to talk to Lila and other, mentors who I met along the way about these situations. And in the early day, I mean, I'm not shy. I will say straightforwardly what I think. But there were some really good lines that, were around in the conversations. And one of my favorites from Lila was, for example, whenever I would go to negotiate a salary or a raise or circumstances for research or whatever, and women typically have a more difficult time negotiating for higher salaries, et cetera, just because of the history, not because they're bad at it particularly, but I think there's a little reluctance to think that you're worth it. And her advice would be to say, when you go in there, be a man, which all of us laugh hysterically at because it's so right on.
It's
You as a woman
irrefutable.
walking in there, just be a man. So having a mentor is really, really important in the early day. And I'll say, now that I'm a really senior faculty, many decades later, I spend a lot of time thinking about mentoring women who are early career. And that's done formally, it's done informally. It's part of being part of a network where you can help. And so those networks, again, I think are crucial.
Do you think that's your taking the torch from Lila?
Definitely. Definitely. She was a great role model in that regard. I don't think she ever thought of herself as a mentor, nor do I think of myself as a mentor. That's not my primary identity, and it certainly wasn't hers. But it's just by example. And so you can help shape a message for somebody who's going into a meeting, and then they have to take it from there. You can also work from the top to change the system. And that's what I find myself very attracted to now that I am in a position to do so.
This episode is brought to you by Breezeway, a property care and operations platform. Have you ever had a guest walk into an unprepared property, or had them complain about a hair in the shower or a dirty dishwasher or not enough garbage bags? These hiccups can lead to bad reviews, which tarnish your brand reputation. Without the right processes in place to manage your work at your properties, running your rental business can feel incredibly overwhelming. And if you ever feel stuck with too much manual work, Breezeway can help get you unstuck. Yes, Breezeway's property care and operations platform helps coordinate, communicate, and verify the detailed work and deliver it to your guests. You can work with your cleaning team, your maintenance team, your inspections teams, all in one dashboard. They even have a mobile app where your team can complete customized checklists and upload photos to make sure the work aligns with your standards. With Breezeway, you set your business up for success by implementing processes that help you maintain consistency and quality so you can generate more 5-star reviews and never feel stuck again. Breezeway clients have said that Breezeway helped save their marriage, which is a pretty great guarantee. With the amount of time saved and peace of mind that nothing falls through the cracks, you should not wait any longer. Go to breezeway.io/VRMB and sign up for a Breezeway demo today. You can also stop by to visit Breezeway at any of their booths at conferences this season. Mention that you heard them on this podcast, The Unlocked Intermission, and have your implementation fee, estimated at $1,000, waived if you ultimately decide to join. That's breezeway.io bnbfinder.com/VRMB. And B&B Finder, which is the property listing marketplace built for professional property managers. B&B Finder is free for professional property managers to list on. You can then upgrade your listing to improve visibility. They believe travelers should book directly with property managers, so you own that relationship with the customer. They're held to your terms and your cancellation policy. You also make more money because B&B Finder does not charge the traveler a service fee, nor do they charge property managers a transaction fee. Their goal is to empower professional property managers and to make travel more enjoyable and less expensive for everybody. B&B Finder only works with professional property managers, so they don't work with for rent by owner situations. Now, they're offering a special for listeners of this podcast. They're offering a free upgrade for a period of 6 months if you simply mention the phrase BNB without the fees to any B&B Finder representative or booth at conference season this year. You'll get 6 months of a free upgraded offer. You can also head over to their website, bnbfinder.com/list. And as a reward, your listing will be upgraded from free to bronze or bronze to silver or silver to gold. That upgrade will be live for 6 months. So this is a pretty wonderful opportunity to try out a company whose values are in line with yours. That's bnbfinder.com/list.
I think that, doing the things that one needs in so-called positions of leadership, there are people who enjoy it. There are people who don't enjoy it. There are people who are sort of good at it and people who really just aren't that good at it. And I think that I've enjoyed it over the years and I'm relatively good at it. I don't think I'm fabulous at it, but I think I'm quite capable. So actually, when I got to Baltimore, to Hopkins, within a few years I became department chair, and that's a role in which you have to learn what to do. And so one of the things that I learned, that was like the main thing that I learned in the first year or two of being a chair, was that everybody must have the opportunity to say what they think, and to do so without influence, condescension, etc. So I did make some mistakes, and I learned from them. And then after that set of years where I was chair, you also have, by the way, that's talking to the faculty, but also there's the other side, which is talking to deans and trying to get for your department what your department needs and wants. And that's a different kind of role, because then you're not the person who's ultimately going to say yes or no. You have to make the case. And so that's a different kind of role in which you need to craft your message carefully. You also need to get along well with people. You need to get along well with the dean. I mean, you can't be, abrupt and obnoxious, et cetera. Those are sort of people skills. So I learned a lot. And the next leadership position was when I went into the provost's office. I became vice provost for faculty in 2011 and did that for 3 years. And that was being essentially in charge of the faculty across the entire university, Hopkins University, which includes 9 different schools. And so there were people who I connected with, who were the people responsible for faculty in each of those 9 schools. We had many, many meetings. And so you again learn your craft. You just learn how to move through those situations, how to discuss things in a meeting, to allow people to express their thoughts freely, and then to work towards what I think is so valuable, which is consensus. So I really enjoy in meetings where the end will be consensus, not a vote, although votes sometimes happen.
Do you think that your sort of life's work, in a way, this final stage of your professional career, well, maybe not final, who knows what comes next. But you talk about top-down influencing and
Mhm.
leadership. You're now in this position that you have earned that gives you the ability to change systems. When you see, let's say, a system changed in a way that you have been fighting for, what does that feel like?
Oh, fantastic. Oh, it feels so incredibly satisfying. I mean, the latest case of this, and maybe the most powerful in my life, has been a prize that we have just established in honor of Lila Gleitman, who passed away almost 2 years ago. And a few of us, actually, I did not think of this. A close colleague thought of it and thought of having a prize for a young, or I'll say an early career woman in cognitive science. And I've been very involved in developing the prize, in getting the funding for the prize. And we just named the winner of the inaugural Lila R. Gleitman Early Career in Cognitive Science prize to this really phenomenal woman. And I have to tell you, I mean, I could talk about this for an hour, but I won't. The process that we developed to um, think about the prize, to find a suitable home for the prize. It's hosted by the Cognitive Science Society and the Society, two different societies, Society for Language Development. Find a proper home for it, to shape it, and then to actually do the work that's required to decide on a prize winner. We had many applicants. We didn't know if we'd have many applicants. I'm sorry, they're not applicants. You cannot apply. It's a nomination. So you have to be nominated. Sometimes you don't even know you're nominated. But we had something like 36 nominations for the first round. It had been advertised, but one never knows what you're going to get. And there were 5 of us on the committee, and I chaired the committee. And it was the best process I've ever been involved in terms of us all reading the folders, having a first meeting, great meeting on where there was actually considerable consensus, and then listening to other people and what their thoughts were about, the short list. I learned a huge amount, and then we had a second meeting and we decided on the winner, and it's going to be announced soon, sort of in those societies, but the person already knows. So it was just, I went away from that feeling fantastic. And of course, it's just an incredible honor to have represented something that represents Lila's contributions to cognitive science and her reshaping of the entire landscape for women in cognitive science, I think, or being one of the people who has. Yeah.
Amazing. And so many, I think for you personally, so many layered achievements over time, being consistent, sticking it out, following your instinct over time, and then finally this sort of change, an
Yeah.
actual change.
Yeah. So that's why I brought up this thing, because, seeing a palpable, concrete change. There are very few prizes named for women. Almost all prizes are named for men. And so, yeah, it just feels really, really good. Very satisfying.
A lot of society today seems trending towards less quality human connection with one another. It's certainly stuff that I worry about, from artificial intelligence taking away human jobs to social media basically taking away our brains, to remote work, to political polarization. People seem increasingly further and further from one another compared to the past.
I know there are concerns that people have about kids growing up with, too much social media and too much on-screen time, and I do worry about that. But and I think it is a trend that is a worrisome one. I think what has to happen is that there has to be a return to family as a really foundational importance. And when I think about you guys, you and Simon, who grow up, with the internet, But you weren't in the generation that had the internet as your sole your
No.
sole support. You had lots of things. So I'm hopeful because there's sports and you can't do the kind of sports that I know about. You can't do that remotely. You can play chess remotely, which is probably a good
Video
thing.
games.
There are video games, but I'm thinking about there are some remote things like playing chess. Competitive chess is you can do online, and that's great. Um, but I think that there are lots of in-person opportunities, and I think this is actually a theme that I'm happy we're talking about, which is family. I think that family and social institutions are having a moment where they have become perhaps less important than they should be, and they need to tilt back in the other direction. And so, it used to be when we were growing up, we lived obviously with our families, and then when we went to school, we might have gone away. We did go away, but when we moved back, both of us, both Dad and I, and you guys were part of this, obviously, we lived near our families. So we all lived in New Jersey. And actually your aunt and uncle and cousins, Michael and Mimi and Leslie and Stephen, were really critical in the your early development, you and Simon. I mean, we were absolutely a part of that. And we were part of Leslie and Stephen's growing up. And I think that was magical and wonderful. And I'm hoping that things tilt back in the other direction such that institutions, I mean, even religious institutions, I'm not religious, but I think they actually carry out a really important function, which is supporting social networks, in-person social networks that have meaning to create meaningful relationships. So that would be, yes, I have the concern, and I'm sort of hopeful. I think it depends a lot on the particular people. Some people are especially sensitive to it and have opportunities. Others are not. I would like to see things tilt back in the direction of family.
So my mom doesn't consider herself religious, but she is curious. She is open, and she's definitely aware of how perception can change any individual's reality. So I was curious why, for me, it took 40 years. My mom had never actually been to Israel herself.
I actually would love to go to Israel. And why we haven't? I think Dad is less interested than I am. But I do want to make a distinction between religion and culture. So in my family, that is to say, my original family, biological family, my family was not, I don't think was religious. Like we didn't have people, I mean, I think both my parents were agnostic at least, but we always belonged to a synagogue and we always went to synagogue on high holy days. And we always had Passover dinner, usually with relatives. And I felt strongly that you guys should have a similar experience. And it was facilitated by the fact that Michael and Mimi were observant. And so we could participate with them in those kinds of things. Dad's family was observant, but Dad is totally unreligious. And I think he would acknowledge an interest in Jewish culture, but he wasn't invested in you guys having a bar mitzvah. It was like that I said they have to. At least that's my memory. You may differ. But yeah, I think part of it is age, Matthew. I think a lot of kids, if they're not regularly going to religious school, and if it's not, the religious part of it is not part of the culture. So I consider the Jewish culture very important to my identity.
But I am really curious if you can put a finger on it. Why don't you think you have ever gone? Is there anything else about it that has not raised it on your priority list?
I think for a while I really didn't want to go. And I think that was because it just felt so distant from my identity or something, and also felt a little bit dangerous. When Simon went on, he went to Israel from
Birthright.
the program on Birthright, right? I got very excited, after he came back and he was excited. I thought that was really cool. So actually, I'm much more interested in going now. I don't know why in the early day. I think it was just to me, it was part of being religious, and I wasn't religious. That's the only thing I can say.
I was reflecting on why it's taken me 40 years
Mm-hmm.
to go. And I think certainly the media and the headlines and the image, accurate or not, at any given times, it intimidated me a
Mm-hmm.
bit. And maybe subconsciously, but it certainly never made its way to the top of my, like, I must go here
Mm-hmm.
list.
Yeah.
Um, and ultimately going was actually the final breaking of that image into seeing
Mm-hmm.
a new reality.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I'm just thrilled that you went and that you had such a fantastic time and that you would go back. I think it's really, really great. But I think some of that just takes time in your own development. I think a lot of things happen when you're out of your 20s that you would never have thought of before. I mean, if I can do a little segue to dismembering our house, if that's the right word, um, packing up and leaving and discarding. One of the things that becomes really clear is, I at least am a saver. I think Dad is too. So we have tons of things from his parents and from my parents, tons of things. And I would love for you guys to, I think you've taken an interest, but I would love to have the feeling that I could pass those things on to you and that you would value them. But we haven't talked about that stuff. And we haven't been in a context where we can talk about the importance of those things. Why were they important to keep? So we've gotten rid of a huge amount of things. But we've also retained many things. And some of the most emotional moments of packing up and leaving have been going through pictures. And so we have a ton of pictures, ton of pictures. I mean, more pictures of you than you can imagine because you were the firstborn kid, but all of our family trips and you as an infant and in your various preschools and further on up. And my parents, even like my father, and mother, this gorgeous young couple, when they were probably in their 20s, gorgeous pictures that we've had on the wall. And we're keeping all those things. We have the gallery of family pictures, as you know, from that time on. And that's the kind of continuity that I really, really value. That's so important to me. And I want it to be important to both you and Simon and Joe. I think it's important to Joe because she didn't have any of that. She doesn't have any sort of historical documentation. But that's something that happens even later than being 40 and going to Israel. I think that's what I'm sort of coming back to.
But I completely agree with you that we don't tend to have those kinds of conversations, you and me. And I think, particularly me, I have always stayed guarded from sharing information in general. And it certainly applies to you guys, especially stuff that's really deep or really emotional. Mother, this has been very beautiful. I love
Thank
you.
you. I love you too. It's been a privilege, Matthew, and honestly, I really am honored that you would choose to ask me to do this. And I love we'll have this for perpetuity, right?
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, a new way of thinking about our growth, and are attending any vacation rental conferences coming up this season, I know our sponsors would love to meet you. So much that they've arranged a special offer for anybody who stops by their booths. Yes, if you stop by the Breezeway booth or the B&B Finder booth, or if you speak with any of those representatives this coming conference season, let them know you heard this podcast, and the special offer is yours.